As we look out at reality, there are certain people we like, there are certain people we don't like, there are certain qualities in any person, in ourself, that we like and don't like. There are shapes in the world, buildings, objects, foods that we like, that we dislike, countries, things about those countries that we like or dislike. What's useful to understand is that every single thing that exists, internally or externally, every thought, every identity, every culture, every person, every habit, every animal, every tree, every building, every form, internally or externally, that exists has evolved. Meaning, long, long ago, everything began in our current narrative with a big bang. Nothing, something, rapid expansion. And in that incredible miracle of life, going from something less than the size of a single green pea or kernel of corn to the entirety of our universe today, including our little world, our little mind, our preferences, and all of that came from that original kernel. And everything that remains today in the rapid iterative process of life exists because it is the best path, the most sustainable path, the option explored so far that has yet to be replaced. Meaning 1 trillion years from now, everything that we know and look at in the universe today will be radically different. The universe is only 20 or 30 billion years old, depending on who's counting. 1 trillion years from now, as evolution continues, as life keeps having sex with life, giving birth to new patterns of energy, new patterns of consciousness, new patterns of unconsciousness, new patterns of form and energy, as life keeps proliferating, creating. Most of what we know of today will be changed to such an extent that even if we remain the same as an observer, which will not happen, we will be superseded by new patterns of energy that are more intelligent than this pattern of energy, either through evolution of change, as human beings change to become more and more efficient, more and more intelligent, or through the great cycle of life in which one planet dissolves into some other form of energy, in which a star goes supernova, and there are new forms of intelligent life that may take 1, 2, 10, 20, 30, 40. They may take 150 billion years to develop. Right? But there it is again, new complex forms of life. So life is doing very well. Life is in the business of creating life and is tremendously successful. And every single form, every form you see behind me, every form you see here, is an expression of life's current best iteration. Meaning life couldn't do anything better than this right now. Right? If it could have, it would have, right? Life is constantly iterating, constantly changing. So if you look at a person, if you look at a thought pattern, if you look at a physiological pattern, at a habit, let's say you're drinking a little bit too much, right? That's the best habit that you've developed so far. The fact that that exists, first of all, means that it was useful at some point. Second of all, it means that it was the best option available at some point. And thirdly, it means you haven't developed a better option and implemented it, right? So there may be, and always are, and always will be better options, right? Life is never done. Life is never perfect. Life is never optimal. But at any given moment, what's there? The habits we have, the habits of thinking, the habits of feeling, they're the best that we've got. We're the best that life has got for this little pocket of life right now. Now, in order to iterate, in order to consciously evolve in the presence of what is, first of all, we have to look at and understand, particularly with ourselves, how is it that we developed this particular habit? Like, what did it do, right? We all want to feel sustainably better. We all want to avoid feeling chronically worse. And you could think of a habit like watching too much TV, right? Well, what does that mean? It just means that our brain looks at what we're doing and says, I could get a lot done. I could have a far more interesting life if I watched less TV and did some shit, right? I don't know what it is, but if I did some shit, I'd have a much more interesting life than watching TV, and yet I am watching TV. Now, what does this mean, right? It just means that sitting down is very efficient. Sitting down on a sofa or an easy chair is even more efficient. Pressing a button and having the world come to us through imagination is far more efficient than, getting out and traveling to another country. We just press, documentary of Thailand, and there we are, right? It's very efficient. There's dopamine being generated, which we want. We want to feel good, and dopamine is being generated. It's very comfortable. We turn on the air conditioner, the heater, etc., and so it's absolutely perfect, right? In the short term. In the long term, right, we may get fat. We may get a sore back from sitting too much. We may feel isolated from sitting alone in our own little world. But that's the long term. Now, what does that mean when a person or a species or a culture makes decisions that benefit the short term but harm the long term, right? Cocaine is a great example, right? Feels wonderful in the short term, but it harms the long term. Good in the short term, harms the long term. Sugar, another thing, right? It's wonderful. Oh, I feel great. A little bit of sugar feels wonderful in the short term, right? So all that means is that at the current state of evolution, I, you, a given culture, a given species, has not yet evolved long-term vision with the same clarity as short-term reactivity or short-term vision, right? And so what that means is that a couple of things will happen, right? Either that species, those people will die out, right? Because that's a beneficial trait to think long-term. If you want to survive long-term, it's a good trait. So either those people die out and other people or other species emerge that do think long term, and then life grows, or we learn and say, I don't like where this is heading. I need to think long term. Then our life goes up, right? And we become the next step of evolution. You see, life is not biased. Life is incredibly neutral. I don't think life minds if pigs become the most intelligent species, for the next trillion years, if humans do, if giraffes do, right? Life is in the business of becoming more intelligent, more complex, more graceful, more diverse, more interesting, as it has from the first moment of inception. And everything that exists is here because it was the best iteration that life could come up with at that particular moment. And everything that exists today has changed, has iterated from 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago, right? 1,000,000 years is very small in the scope of infinity, right? 1,000,000,000 years is very small in the scope of a next 1, 2, or 3 trillion years. Life doesn't have any signs of slowing down in the universe. In the next trillion years, our sun will go through a range of transformations that will make this form of life obsolete, no longer sustainable, no longer necessary. But in the next trillion years, of all of the trillions of spherical bodies out in the universe, within which some form of life is possible, there will be so many other expressions of intelligent life. We may argue, does there need to be some kind of divine intervention in just the last 20 billion years? Like DNA is so complex, could it really just come out of nowhere in only 20 billion years? It's a good question, but at some point in the universe's evolution, this question becomes clear, right? Whether it's at the 1 trillion year point or the 3 trillion year point, at some point, something that complex is highly probable. And if something is highly probable, and you have 1 trillion life-affirming hosts to run the experiment, even if it's 50-50, and you have 1 trillion different bodies that could support some form of intelligent life, even if it's 50-50, it's 100% guaranteed over time, right? The universe has got time. Right? No, got to get this done by midnight. So, how do we change something that's the best of what is? Because absolutely everything, rapists, terrorists, all the ists, all the isms, chauvinism, communism, all the things that we cast aspersions to, every single one of those is the very best that life is able to produce in that particular person, in that particular persona, in that particular culture, at that particular moment. Because if life could do anything better, it would have. Meaning if there was any other way to resolve all the different personality confusions that come out of messed up homes, life would have done it. If there was any other way that was more effective at numbing people out in an emotionally illiterate culture than TV, life would have provided it, right? So what we're doing is the best that there is based on what we know, based on the technology, based on the cultural technology that is available to us. And so it's important to understand and to respect that every single thing that exists, bribery, manipulation, guilt trips, bullying, these are all effective protocols at responding to some situation. They developed at some point, right? Maybe a 6-year-old wasn't getting any attention and needed attention and learned that manipulation got attention. And the 6-year-old grew up into a 7-year-old more efficiently because of manipulation, right? And now they're 35. Be nice if they weren't so manipulative, right? But that manipulation facilitated the life they have today. And from the perspective of the persona, of the identity that learned how to do that, the 6-year-old is very insecure about going backwards. Like, what'll happen if I stop manipulating people? I wasn't getting anywhere before manipulation. And now I know how to manipulate. And every time I manipulate, I get a little bit more of what I want. And so I don't want to give up manipulation, because when I'm just nice to people, I get less of what I want, right? You can try it in a, donation-based economy. Like, you say, I'd like to give things away, give my service away as a gift, and people can give what they would like, right? Well, you could say that's a more evolved technique. But the people that do that offer a donation-based economy, statistically get a third to half of what they would receive if they priced it competitively, meaning like as much as they could price and still be low enough that they're chosen. So if someone's income goes down 70% because they do a gift economy, and someone else's income goes up 90% because they put in hooks and do a great sales pitch that makes you feel like you're in a used car lot, but they're getting 90% more money, well, that technique, that technology, that identity is not going to go away until life evolves a population that when you do a gift economy, you get more money. As soon as life creates a population in which a gift economy creates more money for all involved than less, there will be a gift economy. But you need both sides of that picture, right? You can't just have the one saying, I'd like to give this as a gift, and everyone else saying, oh, good, I'm not going to pay anything, and have that technique flourish. Right? As soon as people who are traumatized sexual abuse survivors, alienated, shamed, in a very weird cult dynamic in which sexuality has all kinds of mixed messages, as soon as those people receive a competent, efficient, honorable path towards more sex, more sanity, more health, more vitality, more enjoyment, through voicing into the cultural narrative, I'm a sexual abuse survivor and it's causing all kinds of problems, please help me. Right? Try doing that in public square or in a family or in a church. Try doing that and notice how your life gets worse. As soon as that results in someone saying, oh, here's how we're going to help you and do this, this, and this, that's really amazing that you've come forward, and I appreciate that, and only good things are going to happen, then you will have transformation, and the population, which 20% or so of the population is a sexual abuse survivor, will come forward. And all of those hang-ups and quirks and all of that will be resolved. But as long as shame, silence, ostracization, gossip, lack of support, misunderstanding, judgment, stupidity, and confusion are the result of bringing up areas of sexual abuse and trauma to a whole host of different identities within the public sector, well, then it will be reenacted. There will be sexual hang-ups, there will be frigidity, there will be all the things that are currently present, right? And so in order for something to change from what it is to something more intelligent, you need two things. You need an ecology that rewards that consistently. You need the skill and technology of transition. And you need to know something to transition towards that is more intelligent. Right? As long as the ecology rewards people for just doubling down and becoming a workaholic, and doesn't reward them for crying and grieving lost innocence, we will have workaholics with a lot of lost innocence, a lot of buried grief, right? And it's an ecological thing. And similarly, when you look at yourself, if you do internal family systems work, for example, you will discover all the different areas that you self-sabotage, all the areas that you undermine something. And what you will discover if you go deep into that work is that this was how that part survived. This was how that part got attention. This is how that part got more. Right? Screaming, having a tantrum, did wonders for a 2-year-old in a dysfunctional home, right? So let's have a tantrum, right? Right? As long as the pattern yields higher well-being than another pattern, it will exist. The very fact that something exists today, is saying that the environment around us today supports that, rewards that, or it would not exist. Life, as it exists today, is rewarding greed, or rewarding jealousy, or rewarding punishment. Life's saying that that's works. Because the only thing that we have 20 or 30 billion years after life began is stuff that is sustainable. 99% of all the species have died out. We happen to be here. Now, in 1 trillion years, 99% of everything that's alive today will have died out, meaning it will have changed so rapidly, so radically, that we can't recognize it. Or it will be consumed by other energy patterns that are bigger, either in the crudeness of, sometime in the next 1 trillion years, there's going to be a very large asteroid that's going to hit this planet and eliminate every species on this planet, unless we've migrated to other planets, or we've developed the technology to intercept and disperse or redirect asteroids, which, if we do that before that happens, then there's still the sun, right? The sun is still going to do its thing in the next 1 trillion years, unless we create an alternate sun, or figure out a technology to send the sun off before it goes supernova and bring another sun in, or create our own cocoon, right? And that's the end of everything that's there on Earth. So, and there's going to be something in 1 trillion years that's more intelligent, that's more efficient. But if we understand that everything exists because it has to, because the reality supports it, because it's the best evolutionary position, right? For example, having shadow sides and hiding them and projecting them on other people is a very effective technology in the cult today. Everyone talks, you're supposed to talk politically correct. You're not supposed to talk politically incorrect. But then politically correctness doesn't work very well. And so you're supposed to be successful and do what works by kind of doing that in a covert way. And then you shouldn't get caught. And then you should, jump on the bandwagon of calling out and blaming everyone who does get caught. Why? Because that works. That works very, very well, right? Figuring out what the zeitgeist wants as kind of an archetype, pretending to be that, which often doesn't work, and then doing what works, and then putting on a show and hiding it, works wonderful. So that's exactly what you find successful politicians, business people, people that are highly effective generally do that, because there's a reward. Then they get dethroned, right? Because then the cult is always looking for a scapegoat, right? And so then it's a rotating musical chairs. Who's going to be dethroned today? Is it the Catholic Church for molesting children? Is it the president for being a hypocrite? Is it the IRS, the CIA for lying in front of Congress? Is it the military for losing $1 trillion? No, $8 trillion. It's gone missing. Right? We've misplaced it. Well, that's ignored for decades. And then it's the time to, do the emperor has no clothes type of dynamic and, talk about how outrageous the military is. When we're done with that, we'll talk about how outrageous the Congress is, how outrageous the Senate is. So the outrage kind of moves along like musical chairs, right? But in the meantime, the majority do the we're perfect, don't look at me type of game and are rewarded for that. That's the best that this species can come up with to survive. It's not the best, it's the best we can come up with right now. And what's important to understand is that, there's a body, there's an ego that's watching, that's noticing what's working and what's not working. That's learning what the rules are, right? For example, in our cult, as long as you do it legally, as long as you, damage the environment legally, then it's fine. As long as you legally fund a law that is bad for the population, but it passed legally. Now it's the new law, then it's fine, right? But if you do it illegally, well, you're terrible if you get caught, right? But if you can put a whole bunch of campaign money to do a law that's bad for the population but good for your company, you've made it, right? So that's the game, right? That's the protocol. We want to make it. Making it is having more money than these other people and these other companies. That's the game. That's the game we made up, right? And so that's, either we have to do it under the table, or we have to do it all above board, right? All the laws were properly passed, all the laws were observed. They're just profoundly destructive for 90% of the constituents affected by that law. But that doesn't matter. Nobody's going to go be punished because it's within the system, right? So as long as that's rewarded, it will be there. And as soon as it is no longer viable, it will die out. And you cannot separate one pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and the ecology that gives birth to it, that allows it, that feeds it, that sustains it, right? If there was no sunlight, if there was no fertilizer, if there was no soil, if there was no water, the weed could not grow. So a weed is just an unwanted plant. We call anything we don't want a weed. So an unwanted plant, there's all these weeds. Well, there's all these weeds because there's all this sunlight, there's all this nutrients, there's all this soil, there's always water, so there's all this weeds, right? But as soon as those nutrients and sunlight and there's zero water, as soon as that happens, no more weed problem, right? And the same is true. Like as soon as we label all these things, that's a selfish person, we don't want those. That person's too greedy, person is too self-important, that person is doing this person is doing that. But as soon as we have a culture that doesn't feed that, and that feeds something else and rewards it, that will die out. And so we cannot look at a part of ourselves. I would like to be less fearful. Okay? You have an overall ecology, including your history, that rewarded you for being fearful. And that's why that part elevated within the psyche. The psyche is incredibly complex and multidimensional and has infinite potential. The fact that we create so many fearful people, I'm one of them, references the fact that fear is very useful in surviving various forms of trauma, in preventing various forms of trauma. In a traumatically illiterate culture, it's very useful. So we can't go to a part of life and say, why are you this way? Right? We have to go to life. We have to go to the ecology and say, how are we creating this? How are we giving birth to homelessness? How are we giving birth to rape? How are we giving birth to chauvinism? Now, we say these, we don't want these, but we do the things that make them not only necessary, but a reality. Meaning, there's yet to be a time on earth where there isn't homelessness. Because homelessness is more expedient in the short run for groups of people that think short term. It's not expedient in the species. For example, you get the most amount of genetic antibiotic-resistant diseases in the homeless, who are cold, who can't make it to the pharmacy, who don't complete their full course of antibiotics. So the homeless demographic is constantly breeding antibiotic-resistant viruses, which then go back into the population, right? But we don't have a population as a whole that has the comprehensive thought and foresight to say, I'm not just leaving one of my fellow citizens homeless. I'm also setting up my children for new antibiotic-resistant diseases in my town. Congratulations, right? So what do? We spend twice as much money in healthcare cost than it would cost to stop making low-cost housing illegal, right? So it's just very important to understand that all of this is connected, that every part of yourself that you hate, I hate the part of me that freezes up every time I have a great opportunity. Well, that kept you alive. That worked at some point. You were taught by your environment that worked, or it would not exist. And before you can take that part to task, be superior to that part, it's important to understand that we don't know how to provide a better alternative, or it would be there. Anything that is only exists because not a single part of the ecology was capable of providing a better alternative, or it would be here. Right? Gosh, I hate this part of myself. Why does it keep doing this? Well, the real question is, why do we continue to raise people in a psychologically illiterate cult that don't know how to attend to parts of their own psyche, their own self, and don't know how to transform one identity to another, because we can go cradle to grave in this cult without a single formal hour of training on how to transform identity. The science of effective identity transformation, which is the single most important science on the planet today. Meaning, you and I know that if we could switch a switch, and everyone today doing things in a suboptimal way would become optimal. Delete all corruption, delete all lies, delete all abuses of power, delete all bullying, blah, 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 right? If we could do that and have everyone be ethical, honest, kind, hardworking people, the wealth on the planet today would go up 1,000%, 10x. Right? But nobody has flipped that switch. And most people haven't flipped the switch inside of themselves either, right? And so the real question is, well, if that's the single biggest shift that humanity could make, and none of us knows how to do it, or we would have done it, then why aren't we teaching the science of identity? Well, nobody knows how to switch that switch either. Meaning we live in a cult where we could all grasp that thought and do absolutely nothing with it, right? We could all take that thought and write to our teachers and our government and say, hey, we want courses on the science of identity, and we want every single one of our citizens to master and attend those courses. And we want to create a 10x better country. It's not registering, is it, right? Because we know the environment we're in, and we know, right, that our politicians are not interested in a 10x better country. They're interested in spreading fear that works to get them elected again. And they're not interested in being ridiculed for anything new, because we live in a cult that ridicules anything new. So, right? So they're not interested in hearing this. And the public knows that and isn't interested in writing them. And the politicians know that the public isn't going to put up a fuss about this. And so we have the status quo, right? A 10 times lower quality of life that is chronically maintained by every constituent of our cult. The church, education system, the politicians, the legal system. Each area could be 1,000% more intelligent, meaning it could produce 1,000% more sustainable well-being while consuming less energy than it consumes today, if it did things differently, if it followed the science. But we also know that the resistance to radical change and the fear of change is greater than the desire for 10x living. And so none of us have to worry about any change coming anytime soon. In fact, we can absolutely count on large portions of the status quo, meaning large portions of stupidity, happening for the next several generations. Right? We can count on it. It's been happening for 1,000 years. Like, we haven't got rid of rape in 1,000 years. Are we going to do anything about it in the next 1,000? Yeah. You know, we haven't even got to the cause of it. We don't understand how we create it. How we create a certain percentage of rape, guaranteed, within the current cultural language. So where it gets important and interesting on an individual level, which is the frame that we look at in our cult, the individual, is to understand that every single part of us, the part that eats too much, the part that addicts to porn, the part that addicts to being in control, the part that rushes off to work and doesn't enjoy it, the part that stays at a job they don't like, the part that thinks that buying the next thing is going to make them happy. All those parts exist in an ecology that supports them and will continue to exist. They exist for a reason. They exist because they have been rewarded more than any other option. Right? Babies are born so innocent and open, so able to move in so many different directions, and we decide what we will reward, what we will pay attention to, what we will educate, what we will ignore, what we will absolutely not talk about, right? Let's go cradle to grave without a single hour of competent psychological literacy. Why not, right? Let's just do that, right? And then let's call it abnormal if you get too inward looking or sensitive or anything. We don't want that, right? We want to get things done the way we've always done things. And we do them like this, which is really crazy, but let's not look at it, right? So it exists because it's been rewarded, because it works, because that kept you alive as a species, as a cult, as a family, as an individual. And there's a strong drive to survive, to exist, right? And so if you want to iterate, if you want to develop, I'd like to stop sabotaging myself and be more visible. Well, that sabotage part is convinced that if it stops sabotaging, then the horrible thing that it prevented with sabotage will come back. And if you don't have the competency to listen to that part, to understand it, to understand where and how it was formed, and to honor it for keeping you alive, you don't have the competency to earn the trust of that part. You're not trustworthy. Right? You're one of those schizophrenic, idiotic, scapegoating grown-ups who reward something and then blames people for doing what's rewarded. Right? Like the parent that rewards whining and then complains that their child whines. Right? If you're one of those idiots, why should that part in you that whines or sabotages trust you? You don't know what you're doing. Right? And if you don't know what you're doing, right, why not just do what works, which is obviously as crappy as your life and reality may be. It exists, right? Which means it won out over trillions of other possibilities that could have existed, but instead you and your life do. So we need a tremendous humility when dealing with what is to understand how and why it is that way. And the technology, the competency to create a different narrative, a different environment in which we naturally create different behavior, right? Because statistical behavior follows a path of incentives. That's just the way it works. The more attention, the more sex, the more money, the more safety, the easier we make something, the more that will be done, right? So ripping off little old ladies in stockbroking offices and churning and doing all that to make the firm lots of money and getting bonuses will exist as long as there are financially illiterate little old ladies happy to give their money to a stranger, right? As soon as that dries up, then that practice dries up as well, right? But we produce both, right? We produce people and reward them for making lots of money, ethically or unethically. We also produce, ignorant elderly people, and we produce telephones, right? And so this is the game that we're in. And if we can honor that whatever is the best thing that life has been able to produce, that we have been able to produce, that anyone else has been able to produce. Right? Because you could look at someone and say, well, they're doing it perfectly. Yeah, but they're not doing it so perfectly that it's not going on over here, right? This culture has very low crime. Yeah, but this culture hasn't developed the competency to stop the crime in this other culture, right? That would be a competency that transcends identity. We don't have much of that. We don't have much of this saying, hey, we do this really well in our country. Why don't we come and send an ambassador and teach you? And we don't have the transcendent receptacles in the other culture to say, yeah, let's have public television where the best practices of people around the world are showcased on public television. Instead, we have egocentricity, we have pride, we have competition, and we have shame to say, no, any other country that does a better job than us, fuck off. This is our culture and nobody's going to tell us what to do. This is our stupidity and nobody's going to help us change it, right? So get away. We feel shame, right? So here we are. Here we are. And inside of each of us are frightened parts and greedy parts and jealous parts and sad parts and parts that are underhanded and parts that are trying to fail so that we don't get too successful and be visible, and be bothered and upset in public and all this stuff. All these parts trying to help us using the best data of the environment. And our opportunity is to learn about those parts, to listen to them, to understand them, and give them technology, give them information on how to do what they're trying to do, what's best for us, in an even more efficient way than they've been rewarded for doing in the past.